Hey everyone, welcome back to Inside the Cage. Ian Machado Garry led to gym expulsion after warning. There is some serious drama unfolding in the MMA world right now. Team Renegade just showed top contender Ian Machado Garry the exit door. On the other hand, last week Ian had an interview with The Independent. At this show, he spilled the beans on this situation. And you can bet he wasn't exactly thrilled to find out he's no longer welcome at the gym in the UK. Garry's been around the block, training with various teams, but he clocked in some serious hours at Kill Cliff in South Florida, and of course, with the people over in Birmingham, England at Team Renegade. Leon and his head coach had an issue with me training on the mats, and recently have asked me not to train there, Garry said. I get that we're both in the top 10, and you might see me as a threat, but I'm not a threat to you right now. I'm not fighting for the title right now. His coach said the words, Ian is a threat. I cannot have Leon having any doubts or insecurities. It's pretty baffling, right? Garry's got a big fight coming up on December 16th at UFC 296 against his Kill Cliff teammate Vicente Luque, and he's scratching his head over why they're giving him the cold shoulder in England. That makes me think someone is weak-minded and can't have another contender training on the mat, Garry said, while Team Renegade stated to The Independent about this whole ordeal. Particularly, they're saying that the reason behind showing Garry the exit door is that he doesn't quite fit into their gym culture. And guess what? It's not a personal judgment, but rather a matter of alignment with their gym's principles. That's quite a statement to make, and it leaves the MMA community wondering what exactly went down to make them say that. Jon Jones explodes on MMA famous journalist. You know, people were really curious about how Jon Jones would react to Francis's outstanding performance against Tyson Fury. Francis did choose to go for the Gypsy King showdown, instead of facing off with Bones when he had the chance. Their relationship has been a mixture of respect and some genuine irritation. So, right after the fight, Jones was surprisingly all praise for Francis. But things took a turn just a few days later. It seems like Bones has got a bone to pick, but it's not directly with Francis. Instead, he's got some beef with Ariel Helwani, who interviewed Francis on the MMA Hour. During the interview, Helwani didn't waste any time in bringing up Jones's topic, referencing his previous statements. Later on, Jones replied to him back in the comment section on Instagram. And Jon Jones says you were looking what? You're such a backstabbing ST talker, bro. And you wonder why I haven't given you an interview in years, at Ariel Helwani. And then, Ariel Helwani fired back with a couple of quotes from Jon Jones that he had in his back pocket, ready to use as references. The first was, I'm here. Francis had the opportunity to face me, and he opted out of the opportunity. If anyone should be criticized, it's Francis. If I'm correct, he was offered the biggest contract in heavyweight history. He had the opportunity to be a guy that dethroned me, and he didn't believe in himself. He wasn't willing to gamble on himself. The other quote Helwani replied with was from May. Calling yourself the baddest man on the planet from across the street? Who does that? LOL. After that exchange, Helwani went on to offer an apology to Jones for not quite nailing the quote and finishing his thought. But man, the tension is definitely in the air. Nate Diaz demands, Jake Paul rematch tonight. In the long and storied history of the UFC, Nate Diaz is still holding out hope for a chance to square off with Jake Paul. He's got that itch and he just can't seem to scratch it. After breaking free from the UFC in late 2022, Diaz ventured into the world of combat sports free agency, ultimately finding his way into the boxing ring after a solid 15 years in the MMA game. It was almost inevitable that he'd cross paths with the problem child, Paul, and that's exactly what happened in August 2023. Unfortunately, Diaz's extensive combat sports experience as a seasoned MMA fighter couldn't quite tip the scales in his favor against the 26-year-old Paul, as he ended up on the wrong side of a unanimous decision. Before the fight, there was a lot of talk about a potential series of matchups. But for now, things seem to be at a standstill, with both sides showing interest, but with some details up in the air. This effer talking like he wants to fight, Diaz tweeted. I'm ready to fight tonight, this bitch ain't ready till 2025. It's been a while since we saw either Diaz or Paul in action, but there's some buzz about Paul making a comeback to the boxing ring on December 15th, 2023. But guess what? Diaz is not one to shy away from the spotlight. And yes, he has tossed his name into the ring as a potential contender to face off against Paul. Now, that's what you call throwing down the challenge in style. Dana White and the Francis versus Jones hype. Basically, Eric Nixick is saying that Dana White should set his ego aside and collaborate with the PFL to co-promote a Francis versus Jones matchup. When Francis initially walked away from the UFC, it felt like our dreams of seeing him go toe-to-toe with Jon Jones were dashed. But my friend, hold on a sec, because Francis's coach Eric Nixick isn't giving up on that dream yet. After Francis's stellar professional boxing performance, he's become one of the hottest commodities in the combat sports world. The PFL is eager to make the most of their investment and is itching to get Francis into their smart cage as soon as possible. The only thing left to figure out is who will be brave enough to step in and face the Predator. The plot thickens, he stated in his recent chat.
In a perfect world for me, man, like, I still want that Jon Jones fight, you know?
You still want that, huh?
Jon Jones fight.
Really?
Oh, yeah, I do. Oh, yeah, I do. Yeah.
Why that one?
I mean, just because, man, I want to compete against the best, you know, and I think Jon is the best. And I don't want any more guesses on who's the baddest man on the planet. Let's run it. Let's do it.
Interestingly, Nixick is all in on the idea that this epic showdown between the former and current UFC heavyweight champs can go down. But he's also realistic about it. He knows it's not going to be a walk in the park. Making it happen will take a ton of behind-the-scenes maneuvering, especially in the corridors of power with UFC bigwig Dana White and PFL founder Don Davis. It's a classic case of where there's a will, there's a way, and in this case, the will is there. To be honest, the elephant in the room here is Dana White, and it's a pretty big one. Not only has he made it crystal clear that Francis won't be setting foot in the UFC octagon again, but he's also not exactly known for playing nicely with others, especially when it comes to collaborating with different combat sports organizations.
I think that Dana and the UFC are smart businessmen, and if the business is right, the money's right, the logistics are right, I think you set your ego aside, make it happen.
But guess what? Money has a funny way of speaking louder than everything else, right? So it might just be what convinces Dana White to give fans the fight they've been screaming for. Derrick Lewis danger alert to Almeida. Last but not least, Derrick Lewis is gearing up to headline UFC Sao Paulo this Saturday, and he's got quite the challenge ahead as he's the loser against Jailton Almeida. However, Lewis has this newfound self-assurance regarding his ground game. He's convinced that if the fight does end up on the mat, he'll hold his own and find his way back to his feet. But here's the main point. He's not ruling out the possibility of pulling off a slick submission move himself. He's even dropping hints about a leg lock.
I think our skills match up pretty well, you know, especially on the ground. I think I could get a leg lock on him early in the first round.
So if Lewis manages to submit Jailton Almeida at UFC Sao Paulo, it would be a shocker. But let's be real, Lewis isn't taking that too seriously. He's having some fun with the idea, and he knows that if he's going to win, it's likely going to be via a classic knockout. And speaking of the upcoming fight, Lewis is aware that when he steps into the octagon this weekend in Brazil, he's going to be met with a rowdy and passionate crowd.
A harsh crowd? I don't speak Portuguese, so I think I'll be all right. So if they're going to be saying something in English, then they might get me. But in Portuguese, I'm going to be like, okay, thank you, yes.
Lately, Derrick Lewis has been on a bit of a roller coaster. But you know, he has some pretty impressive wins under his belt, including victories over big names in the UFC. Surely, it's safe to say he's had his share of ups and downs in the octagon. Alright guys, that's all for today. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. See you at the next one. Until then, goodbye.